perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
I am Iron Man. Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
I have an option.
We have a Hulk, genius billionaire playboy.
Baskin-Robbins always finds out.
Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I will catch it.
Dormammu, I come to bargain.
I am a god, you dumb creature.
That's my secret, Captain. I'm always in.
Why would you do that? We're in the Endgame now.
Welcome to There Was an Idea. This isn't a proper episode. I'll let you know straight right off the bat. This is just a little intro to let you know what to expect when the podcast drops this coming Tuesday. I believe it is let's have a look. The 23rd. The 23rd is when the podcast officially drops with episode 1. But this is a tiny, small preview kind of intro episode to let you know what I'm going to be doing on the podcast, why I'm doing it, and all those kinds of things. So, first of all, my name's Joe, and I'm a huge MCU fan. I've been watching the films since Iron Man was released in 2008. I was just leaving school at that time, so I imagine I was the perfect age for that kind of character at that kind of time. I think a lot of the younger audience maybe weren't aware of who Iron Man was and why they should be interested, or why it was interesting that Robert Downey Jr. was taking up that role and all those things. So, you know, although I was around 16, 17 when the first film came out, I still feel like I've grown up with this universe probably just as much as someone who was, 12 when that first film came out and are now a 22-year-old, 23-year-old walking into Endgame. I was 16 when Iron Man was released. I'm 27 now. And I've always been someone who looked to, film franchises or TV shows as a constant in their life when things are going maybe not to plan. And, previously through kind of my high school life, I suppose, I always had Lost. Lost was a huge TV show for me. It was the first real kind of hour-long or 40-minute episode drama that I was introduced to and got into. And Lost was there right up until 2010. So just at the tail end of Lost, we get the MCU, and that kind of filled that hole for me in a different format, I suppose. The year after Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk, I was a 17-year-old who was diagnosed with leukemia, and having those milestone films to look forward to during that process was huge for me. It really was. Just film overall was huge for me in that time, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe was something that was so important to me, a journey that I'd started just a year earlier in watching Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk, and each of those films that were coming out next, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, the First Avenger, basically the entirety of Phase 1, I was a cancer patient, and it was that was there. That was these little intervals anyway, these little things to look forward to in that kind of difficult time in my life. So, and then going into Phase 2 with Iron Man 3 was just around the time when my treatment had finished. I was given the all clear and sent out into the big wide world, and it was like that kind of phase of my life was ending, as was Phase 1 of the MCU. It kind of all lined up perfectly. It was a very odd situation to be in. But just since then, the MCU has been a huge part of my life, and I've always looked to the MCU as that constant that I always seem to look for to get you through those tougher times. So I hope that does a good job of explaining just how important the Marvel Cinematic Universe is to me, and why I want to sit here and talk to you about it. Now, why I want to do the format that we're doing with this podcast specifically is quite simply that there are tons and tons of very good resources out there, podcasts and YouTube channels, that will get you clued up on the comic book lore that these stories are based on. I'm talking about Comics Explained on YouTube, or I'm talking about Geek History Lesson podcast with Jason Inman and Ashley V. Robinson. They are fantastic outlets for you to expand your knowledge on the comic books that preceded this cinematic universe. However, I think that being almost 22 films deep into a continuing storyline here with the MCU, we actually have a whole lot of lore and mythology built within this cinematic universe on its own that differs from the comics and is worth exploring and talking about in itself. So that's what I want to do here. I want to take an episode at a time to talk to you about an event or a character or a movie or just some kind of moment of significance or object of significance within the MCU, and talk about the ins and outs of what we know of that at that given time. Now, episode 1 will be on Tuesday, and I'm going in at the deep end. Endgame is released next Friday, and the podcast comes out on Tuesday. I'm going to go through briefly as possible, the entire timeline of the MCU leading up to Endgame. That is episode 1. I think it's a good episode to lead you into Endgame next week, and it's also a good episode to start the podcast off on, because it's basically touching on and highlighting all the things that I'm going to be doing individual episodes on in the future. And when I'm saying the timeline, I'm going to take you from before the universe existed right up until the decimation, the moment that shocked cinemas all over the world last year. That's episode 1 next Tuesday. So the idea is that you listen to this, you get a feel for it, and you come back and you check out episode 1 on Tuesday. I'm hoping, the chances are is that you're listening to this on YouTube, which is fine. I'm hoping that the podcast feed will be up and running and approved by iTunes by Tuesday. But if not, easiest place to get the podcast on Tuesday, right here on this YouTube channel. If you follow all the social media pages that I've set up, I believe Twitter and Instagram are both at TWA Idea Podcast. That's the best place to keep up to date. There's no Facebook page as yet, but we might get to that at one point. I think that's all I wanted to say on this little preview. Thank you for deciding to spend kind of 10 minutes or whatever with me to hear me kind of try and sell this podcast to you. And also one other thing I guess you should know. I obviously haven't seen Endgame. I have avoided every spoiler to do with Endgame. And obviously this podcast will be completely spoiler free, or for films that haven't been released. However, episode 1 on Tuesday will spoil every other MCU thing, so it's just a warning for you on that. But Endgame, absolutely not. I'm just as excited as all of you guys, and I'm avoiding those spoilers like the plague. So I think that's all I need to say for now. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this, and I shall see you on Tuesday.